Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. We're covering the winter storm that's hitting here in Northern California, and specifically we're looking around Chico, looking at Chico Creek, and we're looking at the runoff from the park fire. So today was a pretty active day, and so I drove around and got some video, and want to share some of that, and we'll do a kind of map tour and just talk about, we'll kind of revisit a video we did about Chico's flood control system and how it's keeping high flows on Chico Creek from flooding downtown Chico and Bidwell Park. So it's kind of all over the place today, but I started my day taking my kids to school, and so on the way we head up to 5 Mile, and 5 Mile is kind of right here on the north end of Chico, 5 Mile recreation area. And you see this blue lines, these are floodways. And so it's basically mapping from the Department of Water Resources of how much water can go down individual areas. And so here at 5 Mile, there's a levee at 5 Mile that's actually, when you walk up the stairs or up the ramp to get into the 5 Mile area, you're actually going over a levee that starts right on Centennial. And it's also where you ride your bike. And so then there's a bridge over the dam at 5 Mile. And then that levee runs all the way to the Sacramento River. And then if you walk down about a quarter mile past Hooker Oak, then there's a diversion here for Lindo Channel, and there's also what's called the Graffiti Dam, which is a spillway for the Sycamore diversion. And so altogether, those different waterways carry the flow of Chico Creek around the city of Chico, through the city of Chico, and dump it back into the Sacramento River down here in the valley. Let's see, what's that? That purple area is the area that flooded in 1997. So yeah, all the water coming down Chico Creek. This morning there were 6,000 cubic feet per second coming down for a little while, around 7 a.m. Chico Creek itself through Bidwell Park can handle 1,500 cubic feet per second. Lindo Channel can handle 6,000 cubic feet per second, or 4 times what we put down through the park. And then the Sycamore diversion itself is rated for about 9,000 CFS. So between them, you can carry about 16,500 CFS around the city of Chico. Sycamore diversion's got a higher capacity than that, but that's what it's kind of rated for. So we went out and we looked at 5 Mile, and when we first got to 5 Mile, the water was in the picnic area and it was up to the picnic tables, which is what happens at about 5,000 CFS. So the picnic tables here are flooded. The dam at 5 Mile was kind of full up, and so the water was kind of up to the top of the little kind of portholes in the dam. So that is passing as much water as it can. So that's kind of a check valve. Unless that dam fails, no more than 1,500 CFS can go down through Chico. So that when that happens, when the dam is diverting water, then a whole bunch of water moves down this way into Lindo Channel. And Lindo Channel was also at max kind of diversion. The gates there were, the water was to the top of the kind of portholes there. And so that was letting out a bunch of water down Lindo Channel. And then it was staged up and it was flowing out here into Sycamore diversion. The view downstream from the Lindo Channel diversion was pretty impressive, and you can see from the park fire this radical kind of chocolate milk, dark soot, ash, debris, everything else. And then over here at the Graffiti Dam, the view here, every 5 or 10 years, you get a good strong flow that really engages Sycamore diversion. And you can see the logs churning around here, really going to town, and Sycamore diversion. So this was at like 7:30 to 8 in the morning. By the time we went left to go drop the kids off, the water dropped almost a foot at the 5 Mile recreation area. I went out with my wife a little bit later, around 9:30, and we looked over at what we call the Mini Grand Canyon, which is on Sycamore Diversion Channel over here north of Hancock Park. And you could see that Sycamore Channel had come down like 2 feet in the previous couple hours. And there's a spot out here where Sycamore diversion is really incising down into the landscape. When they first, I think, planned out this flood control channel here, there was kind of an existing creek, and it was enlarged in some places, but dumping all the extra water into what was formerly kind of small creek has really dramatically changed. And even just in, going out here every couple of years, often this channel changes radically with each major storm. And so you can see why that happens just based on, the violence of the water head cutting through here. So from there, the water that's in Sycamore, the Sycamore diversion is also, it's called the Mud Sycamore Flood Control Project. And so as we come out here to the Chico airport, you can see that you've got Sycamore Creek is what comes down out of, it's the next kind of major drainage north of Bidwell Park. And so the Sycamore diversion, it picks up Sycamore Creek, and it also picks up Mud Creek. And Mud Creek comes down here from Richardson Springs, and then it goes into levees out pretty close to Hicks Lane. And so together, the Sycamore and Mud diversions, to keep water that in the past would have kind of flooded down into Chico before these were in place. Basically, that whole system intercepts all the flow that's coming down out of the foothills and shunts it around Chico and all the way out to the Sacramento River. So the urban growth boundary of Chico is actually that Sycamore diversion kind of canal system. And you can see that, like out here, the new development around Eden and everything, that's all happening in the city within that protected area. And the reason that the city hasn't wanted to annex county outside of that is that a lot of areas that are outside of that are more exposed to flood risk. So as you go out Hicks Lane, as I went out Hicks Lane this morning, as soon as I got on the other side of the diversion here, there was water across the diversion, and then there was water right away ponded up here against the backside of the diversion. So you've got this really kind of interesting kind of local drainage patterns out here by the Chico airport and kind of across the foothills in general that in the past was bisected by lots of little tributaries, where if you look at the drainage patterns out here, you can see that in the past there were lots of little creeks. Like here, this is, you can see the canal system, but you can see all these little kind of mounds and swales. And then the area around the Chico airport's all been kind of bulldozed and flattened over the last 60 or 70 years. But there's some places out here, and other places have been flattened out here off of Hicks for orchards. But where you see the original topography, you see that there was this kind of really interesting pattern. This is really kind of impermeable land. The way that the soils drain out here is really poor compared to what we've got down in Chico. And so the water in the past has tended to kind of pond up, and like as you get north of town here, like we go up towards past where things are developed, you can just see that like the foothills of the valley here are just like what we call distributary, in that the creeks come out of the foothills and they just kind of branch and go all over the place. And over thousands of years, they've created these really kind of interesting patterns of what we call distributary, meaning just that they just split and kind of go all over the place. So this is kind of the natural, what we call geomorphology, or soils and landforms of this landform that is the toe of the foothills. So all the way up to Red Bluff, you've got this kind of interesting way the creeks over time have just kind of, this is like we're going out towards Meridian Road. They've just kind of braided and found their way and kind of cut shallow temporary channels once they mouth out of the valley, out of the foothills. So when you get over here back by Hicks and Garner and Kiefer, a lot of that's been kind of disrupted by people trying to grow grain in the past, or building houses or whatever. But that whole pattern of kind of distributary stream systems is disturbed and altered. So that's why we still have some flooding issues here in the county areas, is that unlike Chico, where we intercept the flows of Big Chico Creek right at the mouth and diverted into channels. None of that's going on. The county has never done a flood control project in the north part of Butte County outside of Mudd and Sycamore, which was actually built by the Army Corps of Engineers. So this whole area along Kiefer Road and Hicks and Gardner has kind of been built in these areas that have always been kind of prone to flooding. And if just looking at that topography, in the past we've got Mud Creek, we've got Rock Creek, and those patterns were a lot like everything else coming out of the valley. So on really wet days like today, you can kind of see some remnants of that action. So as I drove out Hicks, there's a lot of water kind of ponded along the road, and that's just because it's just intercepting all these little kind of mini streams that are kind of hyper local. So going out Hicks here, saw a lot of water just in random places. Crossing Hicks, it was high, and you could see where the water had kind of kicked up some flooding. The levee starts right there when you cross, when Hicks crosses Mud Creek, then the levee system starts right there at the road, basically. And so that provides a level of protection for these new homes out here in Spyglass from Mud Creek. But there's nothing really up here on Kiefer Slough or Rock Creek other than kind of informal levees that have been built by people over time, personal levees around people's property, etc. So I drove out here on Hicks, and out where Hicks kind of turns and becomes Oasis. This is always flooded. Like I've been seeing this flood for the past 30 years. It's just, at some point in the past, someone tried to grow something here. They plowed this field. But there's still just water that's being intercepted by, branches of Kiefer Slough, and just the rainwater coming out of this little formation here, where the foothills started to kind of kick up out of the valley. And so this is always wet. And so out here, there was some swift-water rescue action last night, I think, where Kiefer crosses Kiefer Slough. And you could see evidence there this morning that the water had kind of gone up and over the road at Kiefer Slough. So I drove down here through this new subdivision. A lot of, I hadn't really been out there for a long time. There's a lot of new kind of fancy homes that are being built. There's a lot of trades out there right now just kind of working on these homes. But it's interesting when you stand up here at the junction here of Oasis, and I forget what this new street's called. You're actually, the creek here is at 213 feet, and 212 feet, and the street is at 216. So this neighborhood is really not very far above the elevation. Right up here is 215 foot elevation, and right down here is 213. So this whole new neighborhood is it's really not very far above the level of the creek. If you look at what FEMA is calling flood hazard areas, this dark green is kind of what they've mapped as kind of imminent flood danger. And it's really constrained to the channel. And then they've got along Mud Creek is also identified as being a floodway. This area out here on Kiefer is mapped as no significant flood hazard, as is this area. But what I think is interesting about that is that this area out here floods all the time, and it has forever. But it must not have been flooding when FEMA came out to do their survey, because they don't map this as being floodplain at all. And so it's interesting to see where the lines get drawn and where they don't. A lot of what is mapped in green is driving around today, you clearly saw evidence in that area. And so there's been this kind of open question with the park fire of how the runoff from the park fire is going to affect this area, because this is all the park fire here in red. So it all, from around Cohasset, it all drains down kind of into Rock Creek, into Mud Creek. And so things are pretty, the creeks are definitely stomping right now. It took a couple days for them to, the soils were so dry, land was really thirsty, it's taken a while. But, here's some video of Mud Creek today, right up to the bridge here. And this is after it's already come down about a foot. So as we move into winter, you know, when we're talking about kind of the specific hazards of flooding around Chico, that's why we keep coming back out here to this north end of town. And so that's why I wanted to go out there and look at it today. So I kind of drove a loop down here through Spyglass, Garner, and then came back on this side on Guntrin. And this is all getting developed right now at the end of the street here. And this is actually, you know, officially outside of the flood zone. But it's only, you know, a couple feet above the channel. Anyway, things are wet. This is kind of, here's some video out at the end of Guntrin, where this is being developed right now. Looking at the county's, looking at the flood control plan that the county solicited for this area, it doesn't seem very practical. Like, some of the proposals are to spend like $200 million to dig big detention ponds up here and then have dams that would divert high flows from Rock Creek and Sand Creek up here into them. And like, it's hard to see that happening. That's like, given like the flow we've had and the duration of flow, like the idea that you're going to put in some sort of big shallow, like create kind of a wasteland out here to like fill up with floodwater, it doesn't seem super realistic. Anyway, they've spent a bunch of money and a bunch of time kind of trying to solve what's kind of like a pretty intractable problem. I think like what we see a lot of is like once you go ahead and build all these houses out here, like trying to make it flood safe after the fact is really difficult, because if you want to, you know, bulldoze a channel and build levees and everything else, there's already, you know, people own this. There's already stuff out there. There's already people's houses, and so trying to kind of shoehorn a big flood control project into a kind of already built landscape, it's pretty difficult. So it's been decades in the making. It's probably not going to get solved anytime soon. But you know, the county, basically their feasibility plan just found that there's just not enough houses out here, not enough people out here to absorb the, you know, $50 to $100 million on the low end that it would cost to engineer and build and plan and permit and everything a system similar to what we see here, that protects the city of Chico for this kind of area that was never really planned for flooding in the county outside of the city area. Anyway, interesting driving around. I feel like every time you drive around in big floods or just big wet times, you just learn a lot about how water moves on the landscape. So I headed up to Richardson Springs, went and visited some friends up there and checked out the flow there. And every little kind of surface kind of gully is gushing. A lot of stuff that only flows when it rains. Mud Creek was receding, some good high flows. People are out moving. You know, there's a lot of people out checking on things and taking care of stuff. So after that, I wanted to go up and look up in Cohasset at the in the park fire. As we talked about during the park fire, the red areas here are areas that burn with high severity. So I drove up, drove up into Cohasset, and then I drove Vilas Road, which Vilas goes up. Upper Vilas goes up and it crosses the Maple branch of Mud Creek. Mud Creek is what we were looking at down below. So I went up and crossed the Maple Fork here of Mud Creek, and this is an area that burned really hot. So I was curious what you'd see there, and really I was kind of surprised how little flow there was in the hot burn in areas that I would have expected kind of more runoff. The ground's really thirsty, and the soils, I think, you know, you hear a lot about soils being kind of sterilized or made kind of hydrophobic where they won't take water. where water just sheets off, and that's not really happening right now in the burnout here. So some of this area that did burn with lower severity or mixed severity, there's a lot of pine needles and stuff that are helping the water to soak in. But in the hot burn, so I drove up to the top of Vilas Road and back on Mud Creek Road, and here on Mud Creek where it crosses the Maple Fork on Mud Creek Road, stopped and checked it out, and there was, there's a lot of kind of fresh sediment that's moved through the road ditches down into the channel, and also is interesting to see where water is actually flowing on the slopes there. And one thing that you could see is that a lot of the places where water flows out here are places where the drainage is already disrupted by roads that are above. So, here at Maple Creek, there was places where there's water coming down the hill in gullies. That's usually that happens where an upslope road is concentrating runoff and dumping it into a single spot, culvert outlet or something else. And so, if you're a landowner and you're trying to kind of prevent post-fire erosion, right now is a great time to be out on your land with a pick and shovel or maybe, a mini excavator or whatever you can use to, find the water where it's concentrating and spread it out. If you find an old trail that's like carrying water along the slope and concentrating it, it's good to kind of to spread it and sink it, right? So the closer to the source that you can prevent water from accumulating, the less likely it's going to kind of accumulate and become a problem. Because roads, by their nature, they intercept the flow of water. They cut through the bank. They cut through the soil. They expose the mineral soil, and all that water that would normally just be going downhill, kind of in the first 6 inches or so of the soil, that the road cut intercepts that, and it comes out and it goes into the ditch, and then it either has to get drained through a culvert or it accumulates and it runs. So some places you see real problems like that are where you have like what's called a entrenched road, where the road is sunk down in the landscape from 100 years of erosion, or maybe in the past from being graded down as like a railroad grade or something, and where there's just physically no way to get the water off the road. And so you see that a lot. And then when that water finally gets dumped into a culvert at some point, it concentrates, and then it ends up causing erosion down the slope below, or maybe it runs down the slope and it gets intercepted by another road below. So a lot of these problems we see with erosion on the landscape, gullies and everything else, they're often just due to kind of water accumulating on a slope and then getting focused in a new point. Roads, especially roads that are kind of that were never kind of developed by someone who knew what they're doing. If you look at this landscape, you can just see all these roads and trails that some of them were built by experienced operators. Other ones were built by who knows who with what equipment. And so when we talk about kind of figuring out like how to restore the hydrology or something, it's like you can go and look at these old roads, and a lot of the times they've accumulated water over time and created gullies. So from there I just headed back down to the valley. Along the way I stopped and I looked at along Rock Creek, where it's interesting to see how vegetation grows in bands here based on the soil and the geology. And those bands where the vegetation were burned hot, and you can just see that expressed right now in this kind of black stripe across the landscape. And you can see how in these areas where not much soil, a lot of the runoff right now is just running off over lands where runoff has happened every winter. So there's not a lot of sediment necessarily to get entrained into the water. So that's just kind of a quick trip through Butte County post-storm. We'll be keeping on top of this. More rain's supposed to come. It's going to be wet and soggy long time. We'll see how it all flushes out.